So let's go over Self-Reliance by Waldo Emerson. He is fantastic, and I can't say that I've read all of his works, or even a lot, but what I have read, namely this essay right here, it's phenomenal. And I'd love to go over kind of some of his ideas that I felt were so powerful, and some things that I think might have been missed, some golden nuggets over the years. Not to say that I've figured anything out spectacular, but just things that aren't as much talked about. This is a very popular essay, right? It's his nonconformity. It's his main thesis of nonconformity and why man should only conform to his own truth and nothing but the truth, so help him God. But there's also some little bits and pieces here that are not so much highlighted as the others, what you hear all the time, and I want to talk about those things too, and we'll kind of see what your ideas are, and if anything comes to mind when you think about those or when you read or hear his essay. So it starts with a quote from the epilogue to Beaumont and Fletcher's Honest Man's Fortune, which is awesome. I don't know how to say this first, it's in another language, but we'll go ahead and take a stab at it. Nete quasi veris extra. I don't know. Man is his own star, and the soul that can render an honest and a perfect man commands all light, all influence, all fate. Nothing to him falls too early or too late. Our acts, our angels, are, or good or ill, our fatal shadows that walk by us still. Now that is a pretty great quote to start this essay. Let's start the essay so we can kind of see why. I read the other day some verses written by an eminent painter which were original and not conventional. The soul always hears an admonition in such lines, let the subject be what it may. The sentiment they instill is of more value than any thought they may contain. To believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. Speak your latent conviction, and it shall be the universal sense. For the inmost in due time becomes the outmost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. Familiar as the voice of the mind is to each, the highest merit we ascribe to Moses, Plato, and Milton is that they set at naught books and traditions, and spoke not what men, but what they thought. A man should learn to detect and watch that gleam of light which flashes across his mind from within, more than the luster of the firmament of bards and sages. Yet he dismisses without notice his thought because it is his. Now, there's so much good here. I just want to keep going. But before we do, I want to backtrack a little and talk about that first most profound lesson that I get from this essay, which I think is just so well said. He says to believe your own thought, to believe that what is true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that is genius. Now this kind of goes with the whole philosophy which Emerson very much so represents, which is individualism, the individual, and faith and conviction in yourself and what you believe against the tests of everything else. And what he says here is that's actually genius. This is obviously his famous footwork for his whole perception or perspective of nonconformity. So to believe what's true for you in your private heart is true for all men, that's genius. Because he goes on to say that if you speak your latent conviction, it shall be the universal sense. And then he goes on to explain that the inmost in due time becomes the outmost, and our first thought is rendered back to us by the trumpets of the last judgment. So to go into this a little more, what he's talking about is the law of attraction, which not just like attracts like, but it's whatever our thoughts are, our reality manifests the mirror of it. And he says it right here, our first thought is rendered back to us. He's talking about instincts and impulses. What's true in your private heart So this is the difference here. He's playing with the idea of what we do in private versus what we do in public. Because just like with the double slit experiment, when an a subject is being observed, it behaves differently. We see this in psychology. When people are in a test group, those who know that the experiment's going on, they behave a certain way, and then they have the people who are the test subject, or the people that are not aware of the experiment, and those are the ones being watched, to act in their normal state and to see how they would respond in certain situations with certain stimuli based on their own private heart, their private convictions, their private philosophy. And I think that the message in all of these that travels through all of these examples is that the inmost becomes the outmost. And not only that, is that your latent conviction shall be the universal sense. So not only does your thoughts, your thought pattern, your habitual thoughts, your beliefs, your actions, and what's your convictions is like your first knee-jerk reaction to situations. Not only is that the predictor and the predominant force in what you see in your outward experience, you personally, but it's the universal sense. So this is taking it quantum in a physics sense. You're taking the whole concept and you're applying it to the whole. You're applying it to the group. If you were zoomed into just yourself, this causes you to pull back and see, whoa, not only is this universal law true for me, whatever I think becomes my reality and my experience, but that also becomes the universal sense. So that's where he brings it into the last judgment, the trumpets of the last judgment that render it back to us. Based on this philosophy, if what's true for you in your inmost heart is something that you're willing to stand by as being true for all men, then you're saying you're putting this philosophy on the line to be tested by the judgment of God himself, right? So that's something that's very interesting, very interesting. Just to put this in here as well, Emerson was raised in the church. His parents, his father was a minister, and he was raised to be a minister. He went to school for it. I believe it was Harvard or Yale, some very prestigious school. He went through all the curriculum. He's very well versed with the Bible and its doctrines, and he does put it into some of his work, even though his work is not necessarily religious, because after all, he left the church to pursue, his thought. So, but it's very interesting how he applies it. It really brings it home. So if you're saying that my convictions are something that, I'm not going to say this again the same way. Let's use an example. So say you're walking down the street and someone drops their wallet in front of you. You see whose wallet it was, and you can see that it's thick and it's loaded with cash. So that's out of the question. It's not a matter of whether you know there's money in it or not. You know there's money in it, you know whose wallet it was, and you're the only one around who saw it, and you're the only one around, period. Your first thought, what is it? If your first thought is to grab the wallet and take it because you just came up on some money, that's one scenario. And based on this philosophy, he's saying that in the final judgment, you're basing your philosophy that says your first thought, which was to take it, to take from another so that you can be better off, that's going to be reflected in your world. That's what you're going to experience in your day-to-day life. When you go to an employer and you just happen to be working on a project with a coworker, and it's a very big project, your job is on the line, whether you get a promotion, your boss has told you straight up, if you do a good job on this project, I'll give you a promotion. And you're working hand in hand with this partner, and you have this idea, and you're just bouncing ideas off of them, and you tell them one of your big plans, like aside from this project, one of your big ideas of a money-making, a money-saving idea that you have for this company that you're planning on pitching to the boss after you get your promotion or when you're in your promotion interview. You say this to them in private. Then you comes down the line, your coworker went to the boss before any of that could happen, and they pitched your idea to the boss, and they got credit for it because they saw the wallet sitting out there, and they decided they're going to take it because self-preservation is the rule of the day. Self-preservation is the philosophy. Darwinian theory survival of the fittest is the philosophy of the day that you created in your innermost world, so that's reflected in your outermost world. Zoom out even further. Now, on a universal sense, that's also the first reaction of mankind as a whole. Okay? So this is what the philosophy is telling you. You need to get to a place where what you have as your innermost truth, in your private heart of hearts, as your personal philosophy, is something that you believe is true for all man, and then it will become the universal sense, and that's the kind of world that you want to live in. So you want to get your private actions in a harmony with what you would like to be seen in the world without and in the universal sense. And maybe when you see the wallet on the ground, whether anyone's around or not, whether there's money in it or not, you run up and you catch that person and you say, look, here's your wallet. And they're shocked. That's how it is today, right? People are shocked. Thank you so much. I can't believe it. I'm so grateful to you that you didn't steal it. A lot of people would have kept it. Now, by you continuing to live as an honest man or woman, your world will reflect that back to you. And this isn't just Emerson's theory. This is a universal law, the law of attraction. This is how it works. He's just mentioning it here, which is so cool. That's going to start to be what's reflected back to you in your world. You're going to start to see that people are honest with you, okay? And that's going to feel good. And not only that, as other people start to reflect that back to you, because that's what you're putting out, that's going to become the universal sense. Because it only takes so many people doing the right thing for it to ripple out in waves. There's a psychological experiment called the 100th Monkey. And basically it had to do with animals, monkeys, in their native habitat, doing a certain practice to get their food. And one of them starts to break the coconut, I guess, himself, and there's another way where they just kind of do something. Long story short, one set of monkeys, all their existence have been doing it the hard way. A new monkey comes along, starts doing it in a shortcut. Slowly but surely, his surrounding group starts taking that shortcut. A few more start taking that shortcut. Everybody in the little area doesn't start doing it the shortcut. Some do it the old way, some do it the new. A phenomena happens though. As the 100th monkey comes around that does these things in this new way, this more efficient way, this more evolved way, monkeys that aren't even anywhere near them pick up on this new way, and they start doing it in different collections all around the world. This species of monkey, they just click in, they just tap into that way of being, that process of doing things in that way, and they're able to benefit from it. So it benefits you to live towards a moral compass and a moral code. Not only will it benefit you in how you treat others, but it'll reflect back in how others treat you. And then by that happening on a regular basis, it zooms out to this universal norm that we all get to benefit from. And then in the final judgment, we all get sorted as good. Okay? So that's kind of how I read that, and I am so I could close this essay right here and just be so satisfied just with that thought alone. But he goes on, and there's so much more great things to share in here. So I hope you stay with me as we read through Emerson's Self-Reliance.